Hello and welcome to Scott Rock, our brand new podcast by Climb Scotland, bringing you climbing stories and mountain tales from Scottish underdogs and local heroes.
Your hosts are the legendary, me, Calum McBain, and
me, Robert Mackenzie. Calum, what is the plan, bud?
Well, we both love interview podcasts, and for our jobs we get to travel around and speak to loads of different climbers. So we thought we would combine both of these things and share the stories we hear through this podcast.
That's right, we're not just interviewing the hardcore among you, but literally anyone that we think has a cool story to tell. And we know that there's a lot of you out there.
So keep an eye out every fortnight for the latest climber chat. And if you have anyone you'd like to hear from, or if you want to be in the show yourself, let us know and spread the Scott Rock word.
And remember guys, when you get back out there climbing, back to the crags, back to the walls, be safe and do your buddy checks. Enjoy the podcast.
Hey everyone, you're back with Calum from the Scott Rock podcast. Let's just dive straight back into part 2 with Simon Yearsley. Climbing walls I think are interesting in particular just because of the spectrum of people that are part of that community.
Yeah.
Like you could speak to a 7-year-old who's an elite climber, or there could be someone in their 60s been climbing for a long time, and you have that common ground where in a lot of other sports you don't get those two people meeting.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think, if you look at, and we'll take Perth Wall as an example, that, I was down there 2 weeks ago, and there were some guys, I think 3 or 4 of them, they were scout leaders. They were wanting to get their the SPA.
It's now changed as well to make it even more confusing.
Anyway, they were wanting to get the qualification, which you know well more about than me, the qualification that they need to be able to take scouts climbing indoors. And they were completely new to it, and they were just doing all the things that you see people new to climbing do, like slapping their feet on and overreaching for holds and not thinking about where the balance was. And I was just chatting to one of them, and I said, have a think about just trying to put your feet on silent, just so that the silent foot thing. And he said, oh, that was fantastic, that was brilliant. And they were pulling a rope down, and I said, what you might want to think about is just unclipping the penultimate bolt and the ultimate draw before you pull the rope down. Then you've always got the first draw clipped. I said, standard practice on a sport, climbing stops you breaking your ankle on the climbing wall. And he said, oh, that's fantastic and brilliant. And we had lots, and I've seen them I've seen them usually once a week or so. And what they're doing is I see them as getting loads of enjoyment and fun out of being there and learning stuff. And then I look at myself there, and I love it, and I get loads of enjoyment and loads of fun, and I learn stuff from other people as well. So I might have been climbing for 40 odd years, they've been climbing for a week, but that participation in climbing enables you to enjoy yourself and learn stuff, and so we're almost both getting the same kind of thing out of it, with totally different degrees of technical ability and years of experience, but that participation in a climbing wall environment lets you have fun and lets you learn stuff. Yeah, it's got to be good. And I every time I go to that wall, that I'm probably one of the worst climbers there, and see climbers who are a million times better than me and climbing far more fluently and beautifully and smoothly than me, whether they're my age or different ages or way, way younger. And I love it. I love watching and being around people when they're climbing, even more so than the years I spent doing first ascents in winter in Scotland. You've only got your mate's arse to look at usually, or but saying that, Malcolm and I have done the same thing. We've been enjoying ourselves and been learning lots. So I think that vehicle of climbing enables you to learn and develop and improve and learn more about yourself and how you are in certain situations as well. So it's a powerful thing.
It's interesting as well, I suppose. The climbing wall environment is not just like different ages and backgrounds. You mentioned ability as well, which I think is what sets it apart from most other sports, where you wouldn't have David Beckham It's my terrible football
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
There's probably more modern ones.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have David Beckham training next to someone who's just got into football.
Absolutely.
But you could feasibly have Dave McLeod training next to a birthday party session.
Yeah.
So you see almost like the start and the end of the journey in the same place, which is really cool.
And I think you're right. I think there are a few other sports. The only other one I can think of is actually it's bizarrely is downhill mountain biking, where you have the same course, and I know that because my son Ed spent a few years really getting involved big time in downhill mountain biking. Was competing at kind of GB level, and he would be training. As in the youngest age range, he'd be competing on that same track in the same event as G Atherton and some of his some world champions. And I think there aren't many others though. There aren't many others when you can rub side, be in the same environment on a level playing field with people of such different abilities. I do a lot of work with Montaigne, and they've looked after me for 7 years or so, and occasionally people recognise me, and which is always acutely embarrassing. But I've had a couple of times at Perth Climbing Wall, almost the "what are you doing here" type. Not quite, but you can kind of sense that. Oh, I thought you'd be up, you'd be off in the mountains somewhere, and it's almost like I'm allowed to come here as well, and I'm allowed to. It's not allowed to. That's the wrong, clumsy way of putting it. But it's reinforcing that point about it doesn't that climbing walls are a crucible for a massive variation of ability, expertise, to mix, and to have fun in the same place, and with when you get birthday parties in, it can get really noisy, and it's brilliant because you get a whole lot of 8-year-olds absolutely loving the fact that their mate has just got to the top of that 4+ and the whole place is cheering them on, and it's good for the soul. It's got to be good for the soul.
Something I kind of backtrack a little bit because we mentioned it a few times, but really interested to ask you because you mentioned you have a son and a daughter, don't you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Ed and Eleanor.
Yeah.
And a wife as well, Sarah.
Yeah.
And something about one of your previous stories really kind of jumped out at me was the Glen Etive story.
Okay.
And you mentioning that you were this sort of bright-eyed 15-year-old who kind of got left out of the bus to go up to Stobcorn and Lochan. It's interesting that risk, like if Ed or Eleanor was in the same position, would you feel worried about them at all if they were that 15-year-old had stepped out? Is it a different time?
It's a different time. I wasn't a father then, and I wasn't a husband then. I think I'll try and answer that in two ways. Firstly, talk about my children, our children. Sarah and I are blessed to have two wonderful young people, Ed 19, Eleanor 21, who share at least part of my love for mountains. And Eleanor went and worked in Candersteg at the International Scout Centre in Candersteg. Wow. She worked there over a couple of summers, and she's always been into the kind of the guiding movement, scouting and guiding movement. And she worked there over a couple of summers, and then she'd finished her first year at uni in Edinburgh. She worked there over the summer. She was a hut warden. She used to look after the two alpine huts in the Swiss Alps in Canada. That was my job. I should have been doing that job. But anyway, she had that wonderful job. And then she said, "Dad, they want me to. I've got the opportunity to stay on and do a year's contract with them. So to work in at this International Scout Centre for as a full-time paid job with a Swiss bank account for a year, and to not go back to uni, and both mine and Sarah's view as well. Just do it. The ability to spend a year working at somewhere as amazing as that in the most idyllic Swiss mountain alpine valley you can imagine. It's like that. I think that's almost every parent's dream. That's certainly mine and Sarah's dream. That our children will grow up to want that and to value that. So something about working in a community of like-minded people in an alpine environment, bring it on. Does my daughter want to do that? Absolutely. And it's the same with our son Ed. He took a year out when he left school before he went to university, and he went off to Morzine. Forgot where he went anyway. He went off to the Alps, spent 4 months becoming a ski instructor. So, he came back with his Mirabel. He went to Mirabel. Came back with his beta level 1 and level 2. So our children, I think, I am so proud of our children, and so proud of the fact that they like mountain environments. That doesn't mean to say they're going to be climbers. That's not the most important thing, but they love mountain environments and that community of being around mountains. Do I worry for them? Yeah, of course I do. Does every parent? Yeah. Ed and I have done a couple of routes in winter, and when Ed has led a couple of pitches, which he had, I'm looking at what he's doing and the gear he's placing with a little bit more interest, I think. But I just put that as a natural part of being a parent. Does my appetite for risk has never... This is hard to describe and it sounds really crass, but my attitude to risk, especially in mountains, hasn't really changed a lot. When I was 15, 16, I didn't really want to die. When I was 30 and 40 and 50 and now 57, I don't really want to die in the mountains. I've got better things to do. I've got more responsibility, having been married now for 25 years. I've got more responsibility having 2 amazing children. But the bottom line is, Calum, I still don't want to die. So, I've taken risks in mountains, and it's probably more pertinent to talk about Scottish mountains, Scottish climbing in winter, and climbing in the greater ranges. I've taken more calculated risks in those environments than I have done anyway. But actually, I think I've not changed my appetite for risk. So I feel relatively comfortable with soloing moderately easy ground in the Himalaya, because normally you have to, because you've got to move fast. And I feel relatively happy doing that in a Scottish winter setting. But when I'm setting up a belay, I'll lace it. I'll get 3 good points and it'll be there. And I won't skimp on placing gear when I'm leading. And I'll never leave a belay in winter or summer without placing a piece within the first couple of metres to protect the belay. And those are things I've kind of always done. And I am very, very avalanche aware. So I'm very snow condition aware. I think I've got a lot of years of experience and a lot of developed learning. So I've not just got 1 year's experience repeated 40 odd times. I've gone out of my way to learn a lot about avalanche and snow behaviour in Scottish winter and in the mountains. So my appetite for risk hasn't really shifted a great deal, because actually I think I'm a relatively risk averse climber, or I'm climbing within the risks that I know, and I'm able to quantify those risks. Have I taken some, risky decisions? Yes, of course I have. Yeah. Have I fallen off and snapped my hand off? Yeah, but that was 80 centimetres off the deck.
Rock climbing as well. So.
I know, absolutely. Yeah, but it's still there are still these. I've climbed with enough people over the years, and I've never lost any. I've never had anybody killed climbing with me, or climbing on a expedition out in the greater ranges. I never had anybody killed with me, so roped to me or roped kind of in my immediate vicinity, summer or winter, Alps, Scotland, summer, winter, Alps, summer, winter, wherever. And actually I'm quite kind of a bit proud of that, pleased with that, thankful for that, all of those things. I've had quite a few good friends who have been killed in the mountains. and so I'm acutely aware of what the mountains can do to people. But because I don't want to die in the mountains, and because I'm a husband, and because I'm a father, and again because I don't want to die in the mountains, I think my appetite for risk over the last 40 odd years has stayed relatively the same. I'll write a book on it one day. No, I probably won't actually put it again. But it's a question I think is really worth asking a lot of people, because I know some people when they move from not having a permanent relationship with somebody to having a permanent relationship with somebody, forget whether it's married or not, but when they move into a permanent relationship, their appetite for risk changes. When they have children, their appetite for risk changes. When their career moves to a certain point, and their career can give them more than maybe it could have done before, then their appetite for risk changes, and their ability, their desire to do certain things changes, and that's fine. That's everybody each their own. I don't think one can ever say that one is right or wrong to do any one of those. But I always think it's an interesting question to ask people. And you're a newish dad, and I don't know if that's changed the way that you look at risk in your climbing. And Lucy's what, 2 and. Yeah,
2.5.
2.5 now, yeah. So,
and then a 2-month-old.
Yeah. And Innes 2 months, yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting... I have a kind of constant dilemma in my head about this, that on the one hand you want to, kind of speaking specifically about kids rather than relationships, you want to show your kids to, in a way, live like a risk-filled life. Otherwise, there's not much point in actually living if you're just going to wrap yourself in cotton wool. But then, especially if younger kids, on the other hand, that... if I died winter climbing, at the age they are now, that's most of their formative years, they won't have my influence. And it's weighing up, what extent, where's the balance? Yeah. And that's why I think this almost is like ad nauseum in podcasts, the question about risk. But it's really interesting because everyone has a different answer, and that's the reason it comes up so often.
Yeah.
And
it's... I've had some times in my climbing when I'm not prepared to carry on. When Malcolm and I would be climbing, for example. In fact, Malcolm, myself and Neil Silver, a few years ago, were on the north face of Triglav in Slovenia, which is just an amazing, amazing mountain. Actually, it's rubbish. Nobody go there. Don't go there. But in winter we were trying a thing called the Long German route, and we got halfway up this route, and I just felt really uncomfortable with the fact that the snow was probably all right, but it felt shit. There was the forecast was that the weather was going to break within the next 24 hours. We were halfway up this thing when we thought we were going to be 3/4 way up it in the timescales we were. So we were well behind time. The retreat was going to be really difficult. Complex, steep limestone face. It was zigzagging around it. And I was like, I don't want to be here. I really don't want to be here. And I felt scared being there, really scared. And with hindsight, devolved, far too much of that decision making to Neil and to Malcolm. Basically sat on my arse and was complete useless. And that's the first time that had ever happened to me. And that really had a big impact on me as to why the heck did that happen? Why did I get into that headspace? And it was probably a culmination of loads of things, of being quite stretched out on this route, bad weather coming in. We just could not find the right way to get off onto what should have been some relatively straightforward ground. We couldn't get there. We were going to be committed to some much harder climbing above, etc. And that's for the first time ever. I was overwhelmed by that situation, and I found myself unable really to make logical decisions about things because I was scared, and that's the first time I've ever been really perturbed and really felt that I was in a very, very risky situation. But actually, we weren't. We were in a pretty gnarly situation, but we probably weren't going to die. We probably would have got up it. We probably could have got down it if we'd have really tried. So there are times when I think when we talk about risk, it's really easy to talk about risk hypothetically. It's sometimes really good to choose specific examples and say, well, what was happening to your level of comfort with risk then, and in that situation, and always point, try and pull the learning from specific situations rather than try to talk about it hypothetically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, almost like so law doesn't make sense in writing, but law is then proven by cases that make an example of it, and then
absolutely.
I see what you mean.
And there's been, on the in 2014, I think it was. So, yeah, can't remember what it was. Yeah, about 2014, we were, Malcolm, myself, and Paul were out in northwest India. We were wanting to make the first ascent of a southwest face of the mountain called Remo 3. We didn't, but we made the first ascent of a mountain called Dunglung Kangre, which was a 2.5 day, 3 day trip up and down this mountain. Great climbing, but the on the summit day we had probably 500-600 meters of about 50-degree snowy icy terrain that then merged into 50-degree really crappy mixed loose as hell terrain. And you're not going to belay it on this. You're not going to get the rope out. There's no point. You're just going to, get into a rhythm, and you're just going to solo it. And there's a couple of photos that we got. There's one that I think Paul took of me, and he's looking down on me, and you can just see this incredible exposure on this ice slope. And the slope just whoomph disappears off, a kilometre and a bit down to the glacier. And I remember when we were climbing up this thing, and it had just got light, but you're in your own kind of little space, and you look down occasionally, think, yeah, if I lost it, I could probably ice axe break. I'd be all right. And there's no way you could ice axe break it. You're a tumbling cartwheel death, but you get on with it, because what you're doing there is, if you stopped and roped up, you have far more risk of being there for longer and therefore stonefall, rockfall, whatever. You've just got to make those decisions that actually are the safest way of progressing. It may feel spooky, and you may try some inner dialogue to persuade yourself that you're okay, but you're in a consequentially fatal position if something goes wrong. But what you're doing is you're doing it in the safest way possible. So you're there, so you get on and you do it with the least degree of risk. Yeah.
It's a hard concept to wrap your head around, I guess, that moving fast is sometimes less risky than soloing something that you shouldn't fall off.
Yeah.
Which is why people quite often scathe soloing, like Alex Honnold and soloing is bad and that sort of thing. But, I mean, scrambling is a form of soloing in reality. Like, if you fall off, the consequences are just as bad as Alex Honnold falling off. It's just...
Yeah. You're gonna go splat. Okay, Alex is going to go splat. Yeah. If you're gonna fall off, Bristly Ridge, or you fall off the Comor Jedagaret, you're going to go bounce, splat. You're going to anyway. It's the number of times you see people, especially in winter. And for some reason, in the Lake District seems to have this thing where you'll often get watercourses, low-level watercourses that freeze. Sourmilk Gill in top end of Bottomere, Borrowdale, something like that. And I remember, as a kid, we'd go and solo these things, and the ice falls at the top of Honister Pass, and we'd solo them because they're not real winter climbs. And you'd solo, and you're 80, 90, 100 feet up this, grade 2, grade 3. But because it's kind of in the bed of a gully, of a gill, and you're in a nice Lake District, people solo them. If you fall off that, you're not going to walk away from it. You're not going to walk away from it. And so sometimes I think people don't actually look at the situation that they're in with enough of a sensible risk management head on, and they'll think, it'll be okay because lots of other people do it. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Scrambling probably isn't as impressive as what Alex did, but in terms of consequence, if it goes wrong, it's in the same ballpark, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just the difficulty, or people's perception of the difficulty, that's kind of skewed.
Yeah.
I suppose another point to backtrack a little bit that I was quite interested in is because you're going to talk about you own 2 businesses as well. So you don't own the camper van?
Camper van, Big Tree Camper Vans. We ran it for 10 years. Wonderful business. Gave us a really good income. Gave us a great, really good lifestyle. Met thousands of really fantastic customers, and we realised that basically we run the Scottish Deli in Dunkeld. So that's a specialty food shop during the day. It's also a restaurant in the evening. It has an outside catering business. We also run Big Tree Camper Vans. That's business number 4. And Sarah works for, she is a company called Engage Scotland. So 3 days a week, Sarah looks after contemporary art in Scotland. It's like, holy moly, that's 5 different businesses. So we've just stopped doing Big Tree Camper Vans, and we're focusing on the deli, on Sarah's work, but trying to take a little step back as well and have a couple of days a week where we've got some of those what they're called days off. That idea of not actually working out, having to work every day. We're kept busy with all sorts of things. Yeah.
How did you, really interesting, particularly for me as well, having young kids, but how did you balance, at the time, winter climbing a lot, presumably training for winter climbing or alpinism, having young kids and also having all these businesses, that's like a lot going at once.
It always was a lot of things to juggle, and I make the joke now that we were working probably 8 to 9 days a week just on those businesses, and I kid you not, it's been a lot of physical effort and physical hard work. What we did with the winter climbing actually was quite straightforward, because Malcolm and I, at the start of each winter, we go through a series of email conversations where we book out certain dates, and basically what we do is book usually every other weekend during the Scottish winter season. So from late October through to end of March, April, we would book every other weekend, and those will be winter climbing weekends, and some of those would have a Friday and Monday off in them as well, and I would go climbing those weekends. And when I didn't have those days booked with Malcolm, or with maybe a couple of other partners as well, then I wouldn't go climbing. And when I was training, I trained in the evening when the kids had gone to bed. And so I think being the only way I could do it, and again it's a bit like the wrestling, you've got to talk about specific things rather than in general, was to carve out those days, those weekends. I know Simon Richardson, for example, when Simon was working, he's retired now, but when he was working, Sunday would be the day he would climb, and he would climb every Sunday, but he wouldn't climb on any other days, or hardly ever. So I think most people who want to do their sport at a reasonably high level, or the only way I've been able to do that sport at a reasonably high level, is to have a degree of focus and structure around it, and also a partner and a family who understand that for me to operate at that level, then that's the way that that is the least worst way of doing it, if you like, in terms of impact on the rest of the family. But it's hard, and it's hard to go into the garage and do some pull-ups and and get on a weights bench and do the things you need to do, and it's hard to go out for a run, and it's actually slightly easier to go to the climbing wall. So I'm quite terms of the more rock specific training is nicer than it is just to go running and push weights and pump up and down on a small home wall I've got in there in terms of tooling training.
Yeah.
But for me, about focus and structure around it. I can't do it with let's go climbing if it's good.
Yeah.
I mean, in the kind of early 90s, Malcolm and I, we've only been living in, Sarah and I have been in Scotland for 18, 19 years. Before that, there was a short period of time when both Malcolm and I were living in Yorkshire. He still does. And so we would, again, carve out weekends to go to Scotland. We'd also buy air tickets to go out to Geneva. So we would buy, and we'd pre-buy them in the days where you could buy like 15 quid flights on EasyJet. So at the start of as soon as the winter flights came out, we would buy a series of maybe 5 long weekends, so like a Thursday to a Tuesday, buy flights out to Geneva so we could go climbing out in Chamonix in the winter if the weather was good. And so, you're investing, I don't know, maybe 100 quid in flight tickets. But then you've got those weekends, those long weekends booked.
Yeah.
And if the weather's good, we would fly out to Geneva and jump in a car hire and go to Cham. And it worked. We got some. It sometimes it didn't work, and you'd think, just spent 100 quid on airfares, and I've gone to Ben Nevis every weekend. But yeah, structure and a bit of organisation. Really.
Yeah. It sounds like that's been quite, because you said that was in the early 90s. You used to do that with Malcolm, so that's been quite consistent, having that like blocked out.
We've done it. We've done it the whole time, and because it's worked. It's worked. It's worked for us. My climbing partnership with Malcolm, since late 80s when we first met. Malcolm is 2 weeks ago just retired. He's a reasonably senior, was a very reasonably senior clinical psychologist, head of adult learning for can't remember which one of the Northeast health boards, and we've both done big jobs. We've both done big jobs at fairly senior levels. Before I started our own businesses, I used to work in the big corporate world as an HR director for a FTSE 10 company. So we've both had big proper jobs, and therefore the only way to create space, and both had big proper relationships, and the only way to create the space to do what we wanted to do with the degree of kind of, when I say professional, the degree of skill and be as good as we have been and are, is to get that structure around it. Malcolm has, up until very recently, full-time job, permanent relationship with his partner Donna, who's also a triathlete coach, and runs her own business as well. So we're dealing with busy people here. Yeah. We're well out of our climbing bum phase. We did that. Both of us did that differently, but we're well out of that, and have had to spend most of the time dealing with what's it called? Reality. That's the word. Yeah.
Don't say that. It scares me having to deal with.
No, I know, it's all right. It's good fun. It's good fun.
Was there ever kind of like an epiphany moment where you felt like you had to sacrifice one of those 3 things and focus on one more than the other? Or so it was family, work and climbing, I suppose, were the 3 things.
That's a good question. Have I sacrificed? There was a time about 13 years ago, when I was working for a big FTSE top 10 company as an HR director, being paid a lot of money, living here in Bankfoot, but virtually every Monday was driving to the airport, jumping on a plane, flying down to West Yorkshire, flying down to London, spending time in Edinburgh, coming back on a Thursday or a Friday. And the epiphany moment was one time when I was driving back up the road from the airport, and I thought, geez, I've not seen my wife, I've not seen my kids, I've not seen Bankfoot, which is a lovely village where we stay, I've not seen Highland Perthshire. I've done some training, but I've not done as much as I should, and that's been the same for the last 4 weeks. So for the last month, I'd just been focusing on work, and at that point, I thought, actually, that balance was out of kilter. I was working too much. As I say, doing a ridiculously well-paid job and a really interesting job, as an HR director in this company, but it was compromising the other things that I was doing. It was giving me loads of money so I could go away on trips. It was giving me loads of money so I can provide for, you know, the family and friends and community around me. But physically, I wasn't in. And so I went to see the chief exec and said, look, I need to go and do something different. I'm not going to do this. And then, after I then resigned from that job, and we didn't know what we were going to do. We spent 6 months or so thinking about what I was going to do next. Then we set up Big Tree camper vans after a while. But in that intervening time, Ed, our son, we were sitting around for a meal one night, and Ed said, so Ed would have been about 6 at the time, and we was just sitting around having dinner, and he said, "Oh, this is great." He said, "But do you remember when this was the kind of second or third meal in the night we'd sat down and had in a row?" And Ed said, "This is great. Do you remember when having Dad home for a meal was a really special thing?" And I thought, shit, no, I didn't. You know, but for my son, it was having Dad home for a meal was a really special thing. Yeah. And I knew at that point I'd made the right decision. I'd made the right decision to get the balance of family, almost forget the climbing bit. It was the balance of work and family that was out of kilter. And it was when Ed said, you know, there was a silence in the meal. I was like, shit, no, I didn't realise that was such a big thing for you. Then you think, how bad is that as a dad? Yeah. And that was, you know, one of the things I did to put it right. So it's about taking action.
Yeah.
We can sit there and, with benefit of 2020 hindsight, hate most of our lives, you know, and sometimes, not hate, but, you know, people look back and say, oh, I wish I'd done that, and if I'd done that earlier, just, you've got to do it. You're only on this mortal coil once, you know. And so it's too easy sometimes to get, and especially with money and especially with career, to let that drive too many things, you know. And yet, you know, we spent a lot of time earlier talking about that fantastic community of our sport of climbing, you know, and that can give us so much, you know, so much more than necessarily a really big paycheck, you know. And being around with our children and our family and seeing them bloom and blossom can, you know, on a personal level, gives me so much more than a big paycheck. It'd be nice not to have to worry about the bills, but, you know, you worry about the bills and you get so much more done as well. Yeah. Don't know if that, again, I'm conscious some of these questions are starting with one thing and then they're going on to lots of other things, but that's maybe the nice thing about a conversation around these things.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
And I think, you know, how old, I can't remember, how old are you?
27.
27. So that, and yet what I see in you is somebody who's really enthused around the sport of climbing and really enthused about being a partner and really enthused about being a parent. And it's, do you know what I think sometimes is the main bit is to be enthused about something. You know, is to be passionate about something, and it doesn't matter what it is. But, you know, when we look, and I think we're lucky as climbers because the nature of climbing and adventure and mountains and journeys and partners is something that is, for me anyway, is quite easy to get excited and passionate about. But when I look around this sounds really dispassionate on other people, and I don't mean it to be, but it is true. I see a scary number of people who have no passion. Oh, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Because for a lot of people, they struggle with so many things that having a passion. But, you know, people who don't get excited about things, and I struggle to put myself in the shoes of a person like that. And again, that might have a degree of arrogance in there. My apologies if it does. And it's not like every bit of my life has been super easy. Some of it, big chunks of it, has not been easy and an easy ride, and I've had to make some really hard trade-offs with things. But all along in there is that feeling of just be passionate about something. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be, you know, it can be your partner, it can be your car, it can be your job, doesn't matter what it is, but have life and vitality and vibrancy and passion about something. Yeah. And I'm supremely lucky to be passionate about this whole thing we call climbing in all its different, you know, all its different formats. And I can't think what I would change that to, you know. But most importantly, it's a passion.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think even for my first time climbing, because we've talked a lot about these different like epiphanies and sort of light bulb moments, which people think are a bit of a cliche, like you don't really get them, but I think they really do exist. And even my first time climbing was like, this is what I want to do forever. And I've always, every time I go climbing, I have that same initial spark in my head, and it still keeps on going. So I feel really blessed to have found the sport that kind of I have passion for.
Yeah. There's I've got to be careful about the language I use, but for the past 30 odd years, every time Malcolm and I have gone out climbing in winter, when you've climbed with someone for 30 odd years, the language you develop between you two of you, and the stories you tell each other, and the things you drop into just sound completely ludicrous to the outside world. Malcolm and I have these two little sub-characters in our climbing lives, which are Lancastrian stroke Yorkshire, Yorkshire climbers, and we adopt various, I'm a Yorkshire myself, so I can get away with it, but we adopt various faux accents as we're going through the day. And one of the things on every winter climbing trip I've had with Malcolm, every day out in the hills in winter, and I'm going to swear this, but you have to excuse me, is as we're walking
bleep it.
As we're walking in, it's I fucking love winter climbing, me. And every time in the last 35 years, I have said that to Malcolm as we're going out, and we laugh about it. But I do, I do. I effing love winter climbing, and I love it. I love it with a passion. I love the walking. I love the cold. I love the excitement. I love the weather. I love the challenges. I love the reward. I love doing new routes. Doing new routes in Scotland in winter is so powerful. And I love all those things with a massive degree of passion. I know I'm not doing those anymore, which is, trust me, it's been a really, really hard, a hard process to go through and hard decisions to make. But I think the interesting bit is the passion and the power and the love for that sport. For me, really has come to the fore because of that. So if you hear Malcolm and I talking in weird accents at all in the hills, you'll know what it's to do.
It's your own little language you have of your climbing partner, though, isn't it?
That's weird.
It's interesting.
Yeah, go on.
I suppose just to round up so we don't take too long, because I was having a wee peek at the time. We're going for an hour and a half.
Jeez, have we?
I know.
Hey, this is either going to be really good or really, really dull and boring.
But I suppose like a round up question is, so your kind of goals have changed now, kind of from winter climbing and alpinism through to rock climbing.
Yeah.
Is there a place you really want to climb in this summer, or a route you really want to do, or anything like that? It's really inspiring you at the moment.
There is, yeah. There's probably three places I would love to climb. I've never been to Mingulay, and the plan is to go there this May with Chris Pastor and other great climbing partners. I was going to be in northwest India climbing with Malcolm, but hey, Mingulay, I've never been there. So I would love to go there, and the weather, of course, will be perfect. It will be absolutely cracking, and we'll get all of those classic E3s done, ticked, and they'll be brilliant. I want the other two other places I want to go this year outside of Scotland. I'll come back to kind of winter, summer climbing in Scotland. Love to go to Morocco. Seen some opportunities for big adventures out there, and loads of places I'd like to go. I've never actually been to Africa as a continent. I've never been to any of the mountains in Africa. And then the other place I really want to go back to is the north face of Triglav. There's a route called the Cop Pillar, which Malcolm and I really want to go and do at some stage, whether it's autumn or whether it's next spring. We'd really love to go and do that.
Is that rock or mixed?
It's rock. It's rock. It's a steep. The north face of Triglav is a steep limestone face. Some good rock, some atrocious rock on it. It's just gorgeous. Absolutely amazing place. So it's wonderful. We do that in the Cop Pillar. It's something we do in summer. So it's probably more a spring thing. So maybe next spring. And Chris Pastor, another great climbing friend, stays in the same village. Chris and I are developing our E3 tick list for Scottish rock this year. So Titans Wall, not done that. All sorts of things on the Dulark, and maybe E4 on there. But lots and lots of things to tick off, and just up the road from here, get onto Hamish Ted's. Not got on that. I know that's more than 7A, but you got to launch onto things and see. And I'll take all the beta that I can get from me on that.
I know I'll have to take you up to Hamish Ted's and spray you with all the
that would be really good.
Intricate really hold beta.
Absolutely, but it's So I've got a whole load of things I want to do this year. I said predominantly because the gap of the void of not going off to the Himalayas is a big one, and that was we've just about sorted out a film deal with that. Montaigne, I say, who work with, have really been supportive on that, and it's going to be a good trip. Coronavirus and movement around the world, dependent, but that's probably not going to make much sense in future edits of this, or it'll make a lot of sense. Who knows?
Or we'll all be dead by that
time.
We're
not doing it, man. No. Just keep smiling. We'll get through it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
Really enjoyed it, man. Really enjoyed it. It's interesting doing this with no idea of where we're going to go with questions. Now you've got your pre-prepared question stuff there, or some pre-prepared questions, but I think the power of just sitting down and having a chat about things is really good, really useful, and I hope it makes sense. Hope people enjoy it as well.
Brilliant.
Cheers, man.
Thank you very much for Simon for coming on the show. As always, if you know anyone else that wants to come on the show, just drop us a line and we'll set up doing some kind of interview. Remember, spread the Scott Rock word. And also, when we do get back outside again, do your buddy checks. One day, they might save someone's life.